What we are seeing right now in the US economy is unprecedented, going all the way back to the 1930s. This has many experts asking, have we entered the next Great Depression?
This market's become a tug of war between the bears bracing for a possible depression.
The Great Depression, unemployment reached 25%. Most people think that we are likely to reach those levels of unemployment.
I'm going to reveal everything that's happening and try to answer this daunting question for you in 3 simple, fast steps. Step number 1, let's go over how the money supply is currently collapsing. And this seems counterintuitive based on what we saw 2020 through 2022. But now in 2023, it's an entirely different ballgame. Let's start by going over a chart all the way back to 2006 to today's date. On the left, we go from negative 10% all the way up to 50%. This chart represents the deposits, the bank deposits in aggregate total for Americans, for the entire United States. Now, this black line is something that you need to pay very close attention to, because if the blue line is above 0, then the amount of deposits are increasing. This is a year-over-year rate. So, as an example, going back to 2006, the aggregate total of deposits in the United States was growing at about 10% per year. Then during the GFC, we see that number go all the way down to basically 0. And then we fast forward to the cerveza sickness, and you guys know exactly what happened with PPP and stimulus checks. The amount of deposits absolutely skyrocketed to a point where the year-over-year increase was up to 50%, a mind-blowing number. But now, look at what has happened. It's not only come down, but it's got to the point where it's gone negative. And currently, the year-over-year total is negative 5%. So that means that the amount of deposits over the last year have gone down by 5%, something we haven't seen since the 1930s and the Great Depression. So if we want to try to figure out what's going to happen throughout the rest of 2023 and into 2024, we have to understand what we saw, a cause and effect in 2020, 2021, and 2022. So let's back up a bit. We go into March 2020. Everyone gets these stimulus checks, PPP. You guys know the story. So we saw the deposits skyrocket, like we said earlier. But what else increased? That would be consumer prices. The rate of inflation went from basically 1 or 2% all the way up to 9%. Well, we can safely conclude that one of the main reasons inflation went up so high is because the amount of deposits, the amount of money that people had, or the amount of currency units circulating in the system increased dramatically as well. So let's think this through. If this blue line going all the way up to 50% caused inflation, what happens when the blue line goes all the way down to negative 5%? Well, we most likely get disinflation, like we have seen in the last couple months with the CPI going from 9% all the way down to 5%. But if this continues, and if it gets worse, which it might, we're going to go over that in step number 2, you could see that disinflation turn into outright deflation, very similar to what we saw in the 1930s. Let me be clear. I'm not saying that prices are going to go back to where they were in 2019. Absolutely not. We most likely will never see those prices in the United States again. But what I am saying is we could see a decline in prices before we see the next wave up. And for some people, that's kind of difficult to get their head around. So let's just assume for a moment that this is where prices were in 2019, and this is where they are today. So again, I'm not saying that prices are going to go back down to where they were in 2019 or even lower. I'm just saying that prices might go from here down to here, but that's still much higher than where they were in 2019. Step number 2. Now let's go over why the money supply has been collapsing lately. And as usual, the devil is in the details. The first thing I've done is listed the main things that could contribute to the money supply declining. Number 1, we've got money market funds. So if the depositor, we'll say the average Joe or Jane, takes their money out of a bank, out of their savings account, let's say, and gives it to a money market fund, it's no longer a deposit. So as you would expect, deposits come down. Now, what's interesting is lately those money market funds have been taking a lot of those currency units and parking them at the Fed in something called reverse repo. And this is taking those deposits completely out of the system. So that's the first reason you would see the money supply decrease dramatically. Number 2 and 3 are very similar. It's basically the average Joe or Jane giving their money to the Treasury, Janet Yellen. And they do that in one of 2 ways. Number 1, they would buy treasuries, or number 2, they would pay taxes. Now you'll notice I've got buy treasuries in black and pay taxes in red. 2 different things. Now obviously that's intentional. So if the average Joe or Jane buys a treasury, they're not really decreasing their purchasing power. In other words, they're not really decreasing the amount of assets they have because they're just trading cash for treasuries, which is an equivalent asset. But if they're paying taxes, now their assets are decreasing. They're taking those cash deposits, giving them to Janet Yellen, poof, they're gone. You no longer have them. You got to earn some more. But let's dive into how that impacts the aggregate balance sheet in total. So right here, I've got the average Joe, and he represents all of the United States, we'll say. And this is the aggregate balance sheet for the United States. Now, if the average Joe buys a treasury, we've got to ask the question, well, what is Janet Yellen going to do with that money? So right here, we've got the average Joe. That money goes right over to Janet Yellen right here. That's obviously Janet Yellen. So if she takes that money that she got from the average Joe, and let's just say she's got some maturing debt that she needs to pay off. So the Fed owns some treasuries, maybe a bank, or maybe the average Joe's Chinese cousin, the average Ho. So she takes those currency units and sends them to one of these 3 entities. Well, if she does that, then the deposits are gone and they're gone for good. But let's assume for a moment that she takes those currency units and spends them right back into the economy on Social Security payments, or maybe the warfare state or the welfare state, something like that. Then those dollars go right back onto the aggregate balance sheet, so the deposits wouldn't go down. Now they'd go down initially when Joe made the payment, but then they'd go right back up to where they were before. But now let me go ahead and give you guys a quick cheat code. Where the decline in deposits really starts to matter is when you see that happen at the same time when bank lending is going down. Well, why does this matter? Because then you know that the decrease in deposits are definitely decreasing the purchasing power of the average Joe and Jane, the American economy in aggregate total. So editor, go ahead and throw up a chart and we can see that's exactly what's happening right now. The amount of bank lending is decreasing. And another very important thing I'd like to point out, editor, go ahead and throw up a chart of the TGA. And this is Janet Yellen's bank account. And we can see that she has been spending the account down significantly. And it's critically important you understand this. Why? Because when Janet Yellen spends money out of her account, the TGA, it increases deposits. Okay, well, if deposits are going down by 5% year over year while Janet Yellen is drawing down her TGA, what that tells you is that if she would not have done that to an unprecedented level because of the debt ceiling, the amount of deposits in the system would have declined even more. Let me summarize quickly to make sure we're all on the same page. If those deposits go to money market fund or treasuries, not too bad. If they go to pay taxes, might be bad, might not be bad. But if those deposits are used to pay off loans and the banks aren't relending the money like we're seeing right now, that could be catastrophic. Step number 3. Now let's go over the end game. How does this play out? Let's try to answer the question, have we entered another Great Depression? Now I know right about now, a lot of you watching this video, just watch that last step, are saying, wait a minute, George, are you telling me that if people pay off their debt, that it's actually a bad thing? Sounds like that could be fantastic. I mean, listen to Dave Ramsey, for heaven's sakes. Everybody should be debt-free. Not really. The real problem is if the banks stop lending. Let me show you what I'm referring to. So we've got the bank and we've got the average Joe. And by the way, Joe just listened to the last episode of Dave Ramsey, and he is super excited to pay off his debt. So if we look at the balance sheets involved, assets on the left, liabilities on the right, you'll notice that the bank has more assets. So there's more loans than there are liabilities. Now, the liabilities are Joe's cash, Joe's deposit that he has at the bank. But why is this? Because he's got principal plus interest. And again, I'm using Joe to represent the aggregate balance sheet for the U.S. economy. So if Joe takes all of his dollars, gives them to the bank because he just listened to Dave Ramsey, it is true that his debt now is decreased. So let's look at how the balance sheets change. The bank no longer owes Joe those dollars, so their liabilities have shrank. But they still have a loan as the asset. We'll say the additional interest. And Joe's liabilities did decrease, but now he has no dollars. And let's remember that one man's spending is another man's income. So if Joe has no dollars, then how is he going to pay Moody for his Uber ride? Or how is he going to pay Moody when he goes to Starbucks to get that coffee? Now it is true, if you have enough velocity, $10 will actually pay off $20 in debt. But that currency has to circulate in the economy. And usually that only happens if the economy is doing well. When we see an economic recession or an economic depression, that's when you see velocity typically really slow down. And I know that I've oversimplified for the sake of the example, but let's just look at it another way. Let's assume for a moment that tomorrow the banks just stop lending. What happens to asset prices? What happens to the stock market? What happens to the housing market? You see, these would completely collapse. And you guys know from watching my videos that the economy is like a hot air balloon. And usually with a healthy economy, the real economy, the production of goods and services, is the hot air balloon. And the financial economy, asset prices, are the basket. So wherever the economy goes, so goes asset prices. But now it's the exact opposite. Where asset prices, the financial economy, is the hot air balloon. The real economy is the basket. So wherever the financial economy goes, in other words, asset prices, that's what happens to the real economy. So if you pop the bubble, which is the hot air balloon, that basket is going to come crashing to the ground. And that's what an economic depression looks like. So I think you can see right now one of my main points to this video, that it's not really about deposits. They're more a derivative of bank lending. So if deposits are going down, well, that could be bad, it could be good. But if bank lending goes down, that's when we really need to be concerned. Now, I know there's probably some Bitcoiners or gold bugs watching this video right now that are saying to themselves, George, you're absolutely crazy. You've lost your mind. The amount of currency units in the economy doesn't matter. They're infinitely divisible. It's just a number. What really matters is the production of goods and services. And you're right. I agree with you that if we went from, let's say, $20 trillion in the United States down to $1 trillion or $2 trillion, or however many green pieces of paper there are, just cold hard currency, prices would adjust. So instead of that Starbucks coffee being $5, now it's only going to be a quarter. And instead of your house being worth $500,000, now it's only worth $20,000. And instead of you making 50 grand a year, well, now you're only making 5 grand a year. So everything would equal out. But that transition period, going from point A to point B, would be a Great Depression that would make the 1930s look like a picnic. So the next question becomes, what is the future of lending? Or what should we expect throughout the rest of 2023 and going into 2024? Well, we just had Silicon Valley Bank go bust. We just had Signature Bank go bust. We basically had Credit Suisse go bust. So it's obvious that the commercial banking system right now is incredibly fragile. And they see a lot of counterparty risk. And they see economic storm clouds on the horizon. They also see that economic tsunami that's heading right at the shore, 100 miles per hour, that we've been talking about in all of my videos. So under those conditions, do you think they're going to be lending more or lending less? Obviously, the answer is lending less, and therefore we should assume that those deposits continue to decline. Whoa, time out. Now, I have left out one major component, and that is this guy, your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam. So let's say that we do have this decline. We go into an economic recession, maybe an economic depression, where prices are actually going down and the economy is collapsing. Well, I can guarantee you the government isn't going to just sit back and do nothing. The Fed, your drunk, insolvent Uncle Sam, Jerome Powell, Janet Yellen, all the central planners and authoritarians, they're going to come in and say, we are going to rescue the economy. So we're going to do more quantitative easing. We're going to drop interest rates down to zero, and the government will do a CARES Act 2.0. That is the highest probable outcome. Remember, no certainties, only probabilities. But it doesn't mean that we won't, or it doesn't mean that we haven't started the next Great Depression. Why? Because you can have an inflationary Great Depression just as easy as you can have a deflationary Great Depression. Are you someone that realizes we are headed straight for an economic recession, maybe even worse? Do you also realize that the government is trying to restrict your freedom, liberty, and privacy on a daily basis? But although you know we're facing all of these problems, you don't know what to do about it. How do you protect your wealth or grow your wealth when we're dealing with a very volatile economic environment? Or how do you maintain or increase your freedom and privacy when we have this woke Orwellian government that's trying to micromanage your life? Well, fortunately, got some good news for you. I have set up an event that is focused on helping you, the rebel capitalist, find solutions to these problems. It's all set up to help you build wealth and thrive in this world of out of control central banks and big governments. That event is Rebel Capitalists Live. It's going to be absolutely incredible. It's in Orlando, May 12th to the 14th. We're going to have speakers like Peter Schiff, Mike Maloney, Lynn Alden, Chris McIntosh, Brent Johnson, Jeff Snyder, Robert Barnes, just to name a few. So to get more information on how you can attend this incredible event that's going to give you actionable intel that will help you prepare for the rest of 2023 and beyond, go to rebelcapitalistlive.com, and I will see you in Orlando.